Hi, I'm Mark Jewell of Selling Energy. Welcome to Learning to See, Sell Efficiency Effectively. This is the non-residential version of this class. So if you're more interested in selling into residential settings, please consult our website at sellingenergy.com because there is a residential version of Learning to See, Sell Efficiency Effectively. But let's launch right into it. I'd like to start this program with 3 guiding principles. The first one is that energy efficiency products, services, and programs all require effective selling. Now, I say this because there are lots of people in this industry, especially building technologists, engineers, government regulators, even some utility people, who believe that energy efficiency is such an obvious no-brainer that all we really need to do is promote it, and people will assume that it's a greater good and adopt it. Well, of course, if that were true, we wouldn't have the mess we have today. And so I really do, for years, I've been on the road telling people that you really need to professionally sell energy solutions as if it were any other good or service. The second thing is that professional sales skills make you more successful at advancing any energy efficiency initiative, regardless of your role in the process. You know, it's an interesting statistic I heard the other day. The average salesperson receives 3 days of sales training in their entire career. And most of that is actually not sales training at all. It's product knowledge training. Now, I've had people take a course like this and say, if I would have had that 10 years ago, I'd be retired by now. Because very few people have had the benefit of having a collected a basket of professional sales strategies and tactics handed to them without having a varnish of this is our SKU, this is our catalog logic, here are our brochures, and this is the ordering cycle. Professional sales skills stand alone, and you need to give them to people that are selling energy solutions. The final thing is you really need to think of yourself as a sales professional, even if your job title does not include the word sales. Why do I say this? If I reflect back on the thousands of people who have taken this course, either online or in person, one of the themes that comes to me is that the companies that have been the most successful have been the ones that have imbued sales skills in everyone who is customer facing. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Well, obviously business development would get sales training, but what about marketing? I mean, after all, they're crafting the messages. They're making the website be congruent with whatever the brochures say, which should be congruent with whatever the customers are hearing from the sales professionals. What about the people who are the product managers? What about the people who develop the website? What about the service technicians in the field, changing the ballast or changing filters or lubricating motors? What if you empower them to be deputized as sales professionals? What if in addition to doing their changing the filters or lubricating the motors task, they looked left and right or up and down and they found other opportunities that their boss, their company, their team could capitalize on? There are lots of possibilities for this. I mean, think about all the energy that's wasted. Think about the cost of customer acquisition. Think about how difficult it was to get that customer on board at the first time. Wouldn't you want to have extraordinary internal account development to make sure that every single opportunity to save energy is harvested inside that existing customer relationship? Or would you rather spend your time trying to get strangers to buy from you? So this empowerment of technical professionals and customer service people and product managers and web designers and marketing people, very, very important ingredients to making your organization successful as you professionally sell efficiency solutions. Tony Robbins, probably one of the most well-known public speakers in personal power, motivation, and success. One of his favorite statements is one of my favorites, which is the quality of your life is directly related to the quality of the questions you ask. And I think this is directly related to our mission of instructing you today. So I'd like to start with a question, a simple question. Is what you're doing now working? Let's take a finer look at that. First of all, let's talk about brochures. How often does a brochure make a customer fall in love with efficiency? I mean, honestly. You've been probably producing and publishing and disseminating brochures for your entire career. Does it make a difference? I mean, aside from the quality of the brochure itself, quality of the artwork, the photographs, that sort of thing, the quality of the design, how many people really fall in love with efficiency because they read something in a brochure? I heard a funny story a while back, actually, from an international HVAC manufacturer who had convened a focus group of their master's class. These are rock stars who had contributed more than $1 million in margin to the company in the preceding year. They asked a question, simple question: how many of these brochures should we continue printing? And they showed them a stack of all the literature the company had been disseminating throughout the world. Many of you, knowing where I'm going with this, will probably be tempted to say 0, right? Actually, the answer was maybe just a couple, maybe the single sheets. And the caveat that was placed on that statement, maybe you continue to produce these couple of sheets, was that as long as you don't make us bring them into meetings with customers because they're distracting. Now you can imagine the feeling on the, in the part of the marketing persons who's put together, people have put together these brochures. Holy cow, these are the rock stars. These are the top performers in the company. And they're looking at the marketing brochures as being distractions. I actually did talk to one of the people just by accident who was in that actual meeting. Several months after I'd been started telling that story, one of my students announced that he actually had been at that meeting. He was one of the rock stars that was in the focus group. And he shared with me, he said, you should have seen the face of the woman who was running the marketing department after hearing all the rock stars say, these brochures are distracting. So think about it. Do a little navel gazing yourself and say, is the material that we're handing out to people helping or hurting us? Is it distracting people or getting them more on point? On a related note, I got to ask a question. How often do you think technical studies really drive customers to embrace efficiency? I mean, think about it. What do you feel if someone hands you a study like this? I was doing a keynote for the Mechanical Service Contractors of America several years ago, and one of my fellow presenters later on in the day was telling his audience, I was actually in the audience listening to him, he was telling his audience, he had a slide very much like this up on the wall. He said, you could put the words "up yours" anywhere in that document and never be called out. Why? People don't read them. He said you could put "up yours" as part of your template and put in every one of your proposals and never be called out. I mean, it's kind of comic, but it's tragicomic. The fact of the matter is there are so many well-intentioned building technologists putting together reports that look just like this and thinking that they're going to get an A because their term paper is the heaviest of all the other term papers that are submitted by other vendors, when in actuality the customer's looking at this, or I should say prospects, they haven't bought yet, the prospect's looking at this and saying, oh, I got to read this thing? Or I have to pretend that I did? Not a good outcome. The sad thing about it is there's probably some good information in there. There are probably some compelling reasons that they should embrace this project. But hidden in 100 pages of technical gobbledygook, those messages are likely to get lost. Never read, neglected, okay? How many customers base their decisions on saving the environment? I mean, think about this one for a moment. You will have certain hotbeds of environmental concern. Madison, Wisconsin, Berkeley, California, Santa Monica, California, Austin, Texas, perhaps, Cambridge, where people really care about the environment. But I got to tell you something. If you go across the entire population, this is just in the U.S., the same thing is probably true in Canada and Europe and Asia, there's going to be a mixed bag as to how many people care about environmentalism. And in fact, you'll probably find a faction of people that not only don't care about it, but they're actually very suspicious of this. I remember a while back, in fact, this is a story that made a chapter in my book, Selling Energy, Inspiring Ideas that Get More Projects Approved. This gentleman literally told me to my face, all environmentalists are liars. And when I asked him, what do you mean? What are you talking about? He said, they're liars. I said, well, what makes you think that? He said, you know that part about the polar bears drowning in the Arctic because of the shrinking sea caps, or shrinking ice caps? He says, it's got to be a lie. My family and I were just at SeaWorld. Polar bears can swim. My family and I were just there. We saw them swimming. They had beach balls in their noses, and they were having fun. So if they're lying about the polar bears not being able to swim, they're lying about everything else. Meanwhile, I'm thinking, this guy's probably off his meds. Back on Earth, however, there was a study done by my alma mater, the Wharton School, and the National Academy of Sciences, I think it was in 2013, when they put two lamps, bulbs for the uninitiated, but two lamps next to each other. One was an inefficient lamp, and the other one was a higher first cost, premium efficiency lamp. And when selected in that configuration, they gave each one of the focus group members, I think, $5, and they said, which one of these lamps would you like to buy? An equal number of moderates and conservatives decided that they would purchase the more expensive lamp because when you did the math, the energy savings would make up for the higher first cost, which is exactly the decision you'd like your customers to come to. Then they decided to redo the focus group. So they took this more efficient lamp and they put a pro-environment sticker on it. And when they reran the experiment, it turns out that a significantly significantly lower number of conservatives purchased the more expensive lamp. And when they did the exit interviews, they found out that the common theme was, we know it's a more efficient lamp, however, we don't want to put our money behind an ideology we don't believe in. That's kind of problematic. So now people are voting with their hearts instead of their minds. And if they're opposed to this environmental agenda, they're going to look beyond the rationality of buying a more expensive, a higher first cost, lower operational cost lamp. So my suggestion, after realizing that sort of stuff happens, this predictable irrationality happens, my suggestion is if you do have a deep environmental agenda, I'd keep it a secret. Have like a little secret handshake or something, because you really never know who you're going to upset by going off on this environmental tangent when their political ideology may be absolutely in the other direction. Okay. Let's talk about another question that you should be thinking about. How often do you think the promise of saving money drives decisions? You know, for years, for decades, utilities and vendors have been approaching the marketplace with the message, save energy, save money, save energy, save money, save energy, save money. Seems to be rational, right? The only problem is most of the buying public is not rational. I only ask a question here in America, where this is being videotaped, are we known as a nation of savers? How about in Canada, our neighbors to the north? They're not much better. I think that the word spendthrift might be more appropriate than saver when you're talking about Americans. In fact, the last statistic I read was that credit card debt was 3 times what it was in 1994, and that does not seem like the prescription or the symptoms of a saving nation, okay? So if people are not that careful with their own money, how much more careful do you think they're going to be with their boss's money? It's not even their money. Not to mention the fact that so often there are several layers of management and lots of bureaucracy and probably interdepartmental politics that separate the person taking the energy savings maneuver and where these savings are actually showing up. So if you think that a person is going to miss his kid's soccer game or his daughter's ballet lessons to stay late at night to read one of those 100-page reports I showed you a picture of a little while ago, just so he can approve a project that's going to save his boss's boss some money, or maybe some faceless shareholder, maybe on another continent, a couple of shekels? I don't think so. You know, a rock star that I interviewed for a speech I was about to do, he put it really well. He was actually in the Pacific Northwest. He was selling lighting retrofits to one of the large aerospace companies that had a lot of property there. And he described to me, I said, well, I started my rock star interview with the same question I start all of them with. To what do you attribute your outsized success in selling efficiency? And he responded, first sentence out of his mouth. Well, I'll tell you one thing. I never use the word savings. The word never even crosses my lips. I was shocked because most people in this business that were, rock stars in selling energy efficiency were not afraid of using the word savings. In fact, they used it quite liberally. But this guy was totally different. He said, Mark, people in this country don't want to save. They want to spend. So what I do is I figure out what they want to spend their money on, and then I point to the waste that they're currently suffering as a result of overspending unnecessarily in utility bills, and then I have them visualize what they could be spending that money on, because the spending is what gives them emotional comfort. And he gave me the example, going into a big aerospace company, talking to the vice president of operations. He gets there a little early, he chats up the secretary. He says, Sally, if this company just were to fall into $10,000, what do you think they'd spend the money on? And she goes chatting around, well, this bathroom next to me is broken. It's been broken for half a year. They don't get around to fixing it. So I got to go all the way across this 1 million square foot warehouse past the leering workmen to use their bathroom because my bathroom's broken. Oh, and by the way, while I'm out there, I hear all the grumbling about that second electric forklift charger that's been broken for 6 months also. They say they don't have the money to fix it. So if I were the emperor of the world, I would fix the bathroom first, then I'd fix the forklift charger. I think you could probably get both those done for $10,000. How do you like that? Of course, he was very happy to hear that, because when he waltzed into the vice president of operations office, the first thing he says is, John, I've looked at your facility, and you're wasting a lot of money unnecessarily on the lighting. And it's interesting, because if you didn't waste all that money on the lighting, who knows? Maybe you could fix the bathroom in the lobby, or maybe you could put that forklift charger, the second forklift charger, back into service and save yourself some overhead dollars on the laborers who have to try to do all the work of the day with a single forklift. You can imagine the emotional response that spikes from the vice president of operations. It certainly is better than saying, if you do this lighting retrofit, I can save you 673,000 kilowatt hours, which is a yardstick that the vice president of operations is not used to using, and therefore it's not going to likely faze him in any way. Talk about other myths. How about rebates? Now, I used to have a business. In fact, I was a CEO and founder of a business that was a rebate administrator. So we had 2 billion square feet of clients for whom we filed paperwork to get them back a lot of money from utilities across the United States, and actually even into Canada. So I can say what I'm about to say with reasonable authority. You know, if you take a look at the way rebates are typically used, a blunt instrument to try to bribe people into buying the right thing, not a great approach. Now, if you do it the right way, where you actually take dollars that the customer would not necessarily think about putting out of their pocket and incent them to go to the next level of efficiency, that's a good thing. So if let's say they're looking at Model 100, and you can use a rebate to apply to get them to Model 200, and Model 200 is a higher first cost, but a longer-lived, higher efficiency piece of equipment that's going to benefit the customer. It's going to benefit the grid by putting some savings on the grid. That's a good thing. That's a wonderful opportunity to use rebates. But if you're like most salespeople, not sales professionals, salespeople who use rebates as a blunt instrument to try to bribe people into doing things, maybe even as the leading statement, hey, I'm here on behalf of the utility, I can pay for something for 50%, or you'll get this for practically free, I don't think that that's as effective as you might think it is. And in fact, I'll give you another example. Let's imagine you're trying to sell energy efficiency to a commercial landlord, income property owner manager, and you're leading with, I think you should do a lighting retrofit. And he comes back with, my tenants pay all electric, that's a crazy idea. And your answer is, but the utility will pay for 50% of it. If he's honest, he's probably going to speak his mind and say, son, it was a crappy deal if I had to pay for all of it because the tenants would get all the savings. If your utility pays for half of it, it's only half as crappy a deal. So I'm still not interested. If, on the other hand, you went to them and said, you know, do you have CapEx cost recovery in your leases? Now, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself because CapEx cost recovery is a topic we'll talk about later. But essentially what it is this. If you have a piece of income property and that property has a lease with a tenant that enables the landlord to charge the tenant for operating expenses, but it does not allow the landlord to charge them for capital expenses like tenant fit-outs or a new parking lot or a new chiller, you still may be able to recover money from the tenants if the capital expenditures meet one of three criteria, if you will. One, if it's a life safety improvement. After all, it's their fannies you're saving, right? They should help you pay for it. Number two, government regulation. Government says we have to do it. We're all in this boat together. The tenants have to pay back the landlord for doing this improvement to the building that the tenant is occupying. The third criterion is a loophole big enough to drive a French fry oil-powered school bus through. And this is the one that says that if the landlord has reasonable expectation that the contemplated capital improvement would reduce operating expenses for all tenants, he can actually pass that through to the tenants as an operating expense, essentially, as additional rent. Wow, imagine what this is. This means that you can take a landlord who in the past would say, I'm not going to do any of these improvements, the tenants would get all the savings, and it would be out of my pocket. And turn that landlord around with one simple question. Do you have CapEx cost recovery? Can I see a copy of your model lease? Oh, here it is, right here in the definition of operating expenses. The three exceptions where capital expenses actually could be considered allowable pass-throughs to tenants. And one of them, look at that, is energy efficient equipment, such as what I'm talking about with you today. Okay? So you can actually not only pass this cost through, but if you look a little further down the paragraph, it may actually have a provision that allows the landlord to charge interest while the tenants are paying him back, amortizing the first cost of the improvement. He could actually charge the tenants the interest to reimburse the landlord for the interest he'd have to pay a third party to borrow the money to do this improvement for the tenants. My most recent lease that I signed in San Francisco actually went one step further. It said that not only could you charge the tenant interest that you had to pay in borrowing the money to accomplish this retrofit, but listen carefully, if you didn't have to borrow the money, you could charge the tenant the interest that you would have had to pay if you had to borrow the money. So think about this for a second. Talk about making your whole world go wiggly. You take a landlord who says, I'm not going to spend my money investing in something that's going to save my tenants money where I can't get the savings. That situation, shake the Etch-a-Sketch, draw a new picture. Now, the landlord is going to go to Bank of America, take money that had been non-deployed working capital, let's say $1 million, earning 1/4% in the money market, put it into a brand new chiller for his tenants, and now what happens? Now he's going to charge the tenants the interest rate that he would have had to pay had he had to borrow that $1 million from a bank or an equipment leasing company. So maybe he's going to charge him 8%. Remember, he was getting 1/4% in Bank of America. Now he's going to get 8% back from his tenants. So he's increased his interest rate to 32 times return that he used to get on that $1 million, while his tenants are paying him back for an improvement that he gets to keep at the end of the lease. The improvement that we're talking about there is a chiller. It may make the tenants more comfortable. therefore more productive, therefore more likely to renew. What if they left? Their operating expenses are going to be lower. You can raise the rent of the new tenant. So there's a whole procession of positive impacts that come from the idea of looking creatively at these situations and realizing that the knee-jerk reactions of my tenants pay for, I don't want to pay for efficiency, my tenants will get all the savings. You need to shake the etch-a-sketch to get a new picture. And just to finish up on the slide, don't be lured into the idea that, or seduced into thinking that if you don't have a good rebate for your customer, then it's going to be a lackluster sales pitch. It really isn't. You just have to think more creatively.